uh, good evening, everyone, and especially the students who have logged in today, not only on this platform, but also on the Facebook. On behalf of Beyond Law CLC and Career Development Cell of ULS, which is an esteemed university of uh, department within Punjab University, and we all know that ULS has created its niche. And in that endeavor, that Career Development Cell is pursuing how to go about the internship, how to do the placements. And in that process, like any other student like we and Anand Thomas, the resource person, who's a partner in AZB Partners, we were always all curious as to whether the litigation or whether the corporate law profession as such, what would be the journey ahead? And how does one grow within the litigation cell, litigation itself is all normally one knows because through of the friends or this thing. But since the participants primarily of CDC, of ULS are from Chandigarh, they always believe that what is the journey in a corporate law as to when is the intern, how is the trainee, and then how one becomes partners, and what is the scope, and the new concept of boutique litigation, boutique firms. These are certain nuances for which we requested Anand Thomas, a well-established name, pan India, and especially within the corporate fields. When we were discussing about all these aspects, and when we shared this thing, a friend of mine, Mr. Puneet Sharma, who is a well-known Doordarshan, National Doordarshan coordinator for all these, he also immediately accepted our invite that he should also take questions. I'm seeing him that he's just walking across. And we are also happy that ULS has taken such a good initiative under the aegis of their Dean, Anu Chatrat, then the director, Rajinder Kaur ma'am, and Jasneet Walia, who is the coordinating all this, along with the students, with being primarily coordinated by Simran Kaur. And I will just request Mr. Puneet Sharma to get himself unmuted and slightly introduce the topic. If he has settled down, Puneet, we are unmuting you. I know that we just asked at the last minute to you that you should give the new flavor to the occasion. Yes, Puneet.
Thank you, Prakash. Very good evening to all. As we know that law is now integral part of life. The need of society is to think in a lawful manner so that we may not commit any mistake or any unlawful activity. Trade, as such, when it comes to trade, it is to fulfill the demand of society, and people forget to understand the need of intervention of law, lawful practices. So far, most of the people, they think about sales or excise, customs and excise only. But it is more than that. Monopolistic trade practices are also there, which are unlawful. So now, to begin with the topic, the first question may be, what is the need of corporate law or law practices in trade? Sir.
Sure. Then I will just request, like we discussed, we will take the questions. Just give a bird eye view of how the journey within the corporate law would be. And then we will take the questions, few questions the students, we have already shared it on the Facebook page as well. We will take, and few questions students can, or all the participants can always pour in on the chat box or on the Facebook, since we are live on the Facebook. And then I and Puneet will be taking questions along with Simran Kaur or any other student for that matter. And if any student also wants to ask a question directly, they can post it on the chat box and say that I can, or not post the question. They can also say that kindly unmute me, and then that participant would be allowed to be unmuted and they can post a question directly to you, and you can share your knowledge of the professional journey in the corporate law. Over to you, Anand.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks, Puneet. So basically, Puneet, just to take your question out of turn itself, though we've discussed, we'll take that last. Corporate law and the whole fact of why do we need lawyers doing corporate work? It's become something that, over the last 20-25 years, corporate law before that wasn't really something that was as developed and as advanced as it is today. If you trace it back, I think the growth of corporate law in India started after the 1991 reforms, when India moved into being a more privatized nation, inviting foreign investments into India, opening up the market. And as the market opened and as the world developed, or as India developed, and as companies in India developed, and there's more trade and more intercompany trade and therefore intercompany disputes, a lot of corporate law, a lot of work in the corporate field picked up. And that's why if you look at it in the late, and I'm not that, I wasn't a lawyer then, but when looking back in history, if you look at it, in the 80s and even until the mid 90s, most lawyers, including people who are corporate lawyers today, if they were practicing law at that point of time, most of them also had some litigation background, or they were in offices doing conveyancing and therefore drafting, pleading, conveyancing, and not actually arguing in courts. But that has changed completely right now, with a lot of lawyers only doing corporate work, helping facilitate trade, helping facilitate commerce, helping companies deal with what they have to deal with. So that's just answering the question. But now going back to the topic itself, when we talk about corporate law, a lot of people, especially when I started, when I went to law school, I didn't know what corporate law was. I went there quite naive that way, having only seen litigating lawyers, and litigating lawyers as well, not too many, because nobody in my immediate family was a lawyer. I've got uncles and aunts, but no one in the immediate family. So I thought, okay, if I join law school, I'll graduate and then I'll go into court. I actually did that. But as I was in law school, I figured out that the legal universe is much larger than we believe it to be before we join. There are various areas of law. We look at corporate law, and most people, when they look at corporate law as lawyers or law students, you look at it as being anything that is not dispute related. Therefore, if either you're a litigating lawyer, you're a lawyer who goes to court, does arbitrations, either you're doing that or you're doing corporate law. But again, if we look at corporate law, even amongst corporate lawyers in India, there is a fair degree of specialization, because the corporate field itself is so large. So while as a litigating lawyer, and I spent some time litigating, as a litigating lawyer, you may have a few more areas that you deal with. You're not going to specialize in most people don't specialize in just one area of litigation. You might end up doing a few more. As a corporate lawyer, the opportunity is there, and increasingly the need for specialization is there. And therefore, people do, if I look at my office, for example, we have lawyers doing several different things. And a lawyer who does one may not necessarily be able to do the other, even though he's a corporate lawyer. So some of the areas of corporate law, some of the more, some of the larger fields of corporate law that we end up dealing with, and again, speaking from personal experience, what I've seen in my firm, are mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, private equity, and general corporate. This is basically companies wanting to invest in other companies, wanting to buy out other companies. Therefore, mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, where somebody wants to team up with somebody else, and therefore you enter into a joint venture agreement where somebody brings money, somebody might bring technology, or both of you have complementary skill sets and needs, and therefore you have a joint venture. Private equity is another set of again investments, but that's primarily a financial investment made by a private equity fund, and they make it as a financial investment, saying that I'll come in at this point of time. I don't have really the intention of running this company. I'd like to ideally exit after a few years making money because I have helped the company grow. There are various, again, within private equity, there are various types of private equity. So there's distressed private equity where somebody buys it in order to break it up and sell it, because the sum of the parts is more than the whole. Therefore, I can buy a company for cheap, but if I sell off its assets, I get a lot more money. But again, private equity is a type of field that we deal with. There's real estate, and real estate is not just, at least in Bangalore, is not just buying and selling a property. There are, again, real estate, there are very sophisticated transactions where companies actually, especially foreign MNC companies, go to a developer and say, if you build this according to my specifications, I will lease it out from you for X years. And so the builder actually builds it, and it's called a build-to-suit transaction, where you go to the builder, you agree that, I want this many square feet, that's my specifications, this is how I want it built. Build it for me. I'm not buying it from you, but I will take it on lease from you for X years. And those, again, are very sophisticated documents running into hundreds of pages. a field that is improving and rather is developing very rapidly right now, and which is gathering a lot of interest, is information technology and data privacy. If you look at it, information technology and data privacy, before, I think 2011 was when the IT rules came out, the sensitive personal data and information rules came out. Before that, in India, we really didn't have any sort of a regulation on data privacy. Those rules themselves are very, very fundamental. They're or very, very simple. They're eight rules on 2 pages of paper. But everyone right now has seen Justice Sri Krishna's draft PDP bill, which the government is looking at, and that's a very, very, very comprehensive legislation. People are dealing with matters where they have to, where if you look at Europe, you're dealing with data privacy at a much more advanced level, and India is going that way. You have areas like infrastructure where people help companies set up infrastructure projects. There's banking and finance where companies borrow money, external commercial borrowings of money from within India. And there are people who specialize in just that. There's capital markets, which is a whole different team that just helps companies list their shares on a stock market. And capital markets is a whole different area. There is labor, which I don't have to tell people about. But when we were studying law, I didn't believe that I'll have to do. I would actually end up having to deal with labor legislation. But as a corporate lawyer, we have a separate team that does just labor and HR work. And there's tax, and there is obviously dispute resolution. Another area of law that is developing and which is a very integral part of a corporate law practice is a competition practice. On both sides, one is merger control, and the second one is transactional, is anti-competitive behavior. So you have those two areas of law. So what I'm trying to tell you is that when we talk about corporate law, it is not one homogeneous area of law. As companies have gotten more sophisticated, so have their needs. And therefore, we end up with lawyers doing various things all under this big umbrella of corporate law. And while I only listed out a few, if you go to the website of our law firm, you will find that there are 28 areas, practice areas that are listed. And we have people doing 28 types of work, which may have some amount of overlap. You might have people doing 2 or 3 different types of work, but I don't think anyone will say that, I do all 28. So it has become very specialized in India. Corporate law in India, like I was saying, over the years has developed. When I look at it, when I started working, and I started as a corporate litigator before I actually got into transactional work, one of the first large disputes I was dealing with was a dispute between a telecom company and its foreign investor. And you have the document called a shareholders agreement. I know that some of you have attended a different talk on shareholders agreements, and you know what they are. But when I looked at that shareholder agreement, I figured that it was an agreement for an Indian company, but it was drafted by 2 foreign law firms. Therefore, at one point of time, and this is quite a long time ago, this is maybe 25, 26 years ago, for high stakes transactions, even though there were Indian law firms, the expertise in India for large corporate transactions wasn't there. And so the Indian promoter and the foreign shareholder both went to 2 foreign law firms, got a document drafted, and then brought it to India and signed it. And that was the level at which India was. So there must have been people in India who looked at it from Indian law perspective and said, yes, this is fine. But the documents, at least for high stakes transactions, were being drafted outside India. Not all of them, but I've seen some of them. Then when I started working, we had a situation where, there are only a handful of lawyers who actually did corporate law in terms of mergers, acquisitions, in terms of joint ventures. And therefore, if a company in Bangalore wanted to enter into a joint venture with someone, there were very few people in Bangalore who did it. So while I was interning with a firm in Bombay, I ended up working on a transaction, helping out associates and partners on a transaction where the company was in Bangalore, but they had hired a firm based out of Bombay in order to do corporate, in order to draft and negotiate that document for them, because there were not enough of corporate lawyers in Bangalore who had the kind of expertise that was needed for that. Of course, that has changed over the years, and that will continue to change. Corporate law has evolved, is moving fast, moving from a handful of people who had a virtual oligopoly, maybe 10 firms that had a specialization and were able to actually deal with the documents competently. We've ended up with a mushrooming of various different firms and various people with great competence and great skill sets. And this is not just in the large cities of Bombay and Delhi. Bangalore, like I said, was when I was interning, did not have set, but it has developed it. We see other large cities developing it. We see smaller cities as well, having corporate lawyers, including lawyers, who have worked in cities like and in firms in Bombay and Delhi, worked in large firms and have decided that I want to have my own setup. I'd like to go back home and work from home. And I'm quite certain that I'll get some amount of work. If not the large transaction, there will be people in my city who need corporate law services. So the market has changed over the past few years. From having a handful of lawyers doing corporate work, there are much more. And like I tell people, I look at India and people keep saying India, China is what India was. China today is what India will be in 10 years or 15 years. And if we look at just Chinese firms, there are 18 firms in China that have more than 1,000. 18 was it? Yeah, there are around 18 firms in China that have more than 1,000 lawyers each. In India, we don't, as of now, at least I don't believe we have a single law firm, corporate law firm that has more than 1,000 lawyers. So the scope and the prospects for corporate law in India, if you take that example and say that if in 15 years we'll have that many firms with thousands of lawyers each, there's obviously a great scope and potential for corporate work and for corporate lawyers. But like I said, it will take time. As of now, while corporate lawyers have moved from being a handful, maybe 15, 20 years back, you have much more today. But what we should keep in mind is that there are 1,300 odd recognized law schools in India, churning out tens of thousands of students every year. And corporate law and the opportunities in corporate law are minuscule compared to the number of students coming out every year. I think across firms and across in-house positions, if you look at it, there might be 1,000 corporate lawyers getting recruited every year out of the hundreds of tens of thousands of lawyers who are coming into the profession every year. So that is where we stand. We see ourselves moving up in life. We see corporate law getting more and more nuanced, and therefore you'll need more people because there's more specialization that may be required. But that is where the position is today, and that's where we see ourselves in a few years. Even through the pandemic, if you look at news articles, you'll find that firms are still recruiting. We've ended up in a situation where people used to say that litigators, they will always have work, because when the going is good, there will be work. When the going is bad, there's even more work for litigators. But we found ourselves in a situation, in March and April and May, where unfortunately, due to the closure of courts, the litigators had less work. Unfortunate situation. And when corporate work did go down, and for a month or so, we did not have as much work as we actually usually had before the pandemic. Corporate law, for some reason, has been surprisingly resilient. We've ended up bouncing back. Companies, of course, need to continue operating. Investments continue to be made. Through the pandemic, at least our firm was quite busy, and we had some very large transactions, primarily because Reliance was raising a lot of funds, and we were representing Reliance on that. So round after round, we had colleagues who were working really hard, even though there might have been people from our firm who weren't as busy as they were. So if you look at it, corporate law is also becoming more resilient as a practice and as a profession. Yes, when the economy goes down, will the work for corporate lawyers reduces as well, because depending again on the specialization and the area of law that you're dealing with. But it is a field that is becoming more and more resilient. Now coming to what Vikas asked for, and that was just setting the context to what we're discussing, career paths. Now, career paths within law firms, there is no one fixed career path, because like there are different areas of corporate law, there are different types of firms, and each firm has its own setup. There will obviously, they're not completely and diametrically opposite to each other, but each firm has its own way of dealing with people, its own HR policies, its own style of functioning and culture. And even if you look at even firms abroad, while they're a little more homogeneous, there are large firms like Kirkland and Ellis, which will make partners there in 7 years, while there are other large firms having thousands of lawyers, which will take 11 or 12 years to make somebody partner, in some cases even more. again, it's a very it's a very disparate area. But just again, going back to what the practice is like, if you do join a corporate law firm, in all probability, you will be part of a team. There are firms that have dedicated teams, therefore one partner with a set of resources who's with a set of resources that only work for that one partner, while other firms will end up with people with multiple partners and no dedicated resources. Therefore, you will work with one partner on one matter while simultaneously working with another partner on another matter. If you're doing a corporate law, which is general mergers, acquisitions, and joint ventures, when you start off, usually what you'll end up working on are things like due diligences, which is basically helping the purchaser of a company identify what exactly the company is doing, identify the strengths and weaknesses of the company, identify whether the company is following its regulatory requirements, and identify what we call red flags and conditions precedent, including if you need permissions and approvals from the government in case the transaction has to go forward. So that's the kind of work that you might start off with. You will be put under maybe 2 or 3 people. Therefore, your work will be supervised by a senior associate and in turn by a partner. Therefore, there is a hierarchy that is there. These hierarchies again are not very, very strict and formal in some firms. You might end up in smaller transactions just having an associate working with a partner. You might end up in a situation where I've had situations where there are multiple tens of associates on a large transactions where you'll have 15 or 20 associates. You'll have 4 or 5 senior associates, and you might have 2 or 3 partners, merely because of the fact that the transaction itself is that large and requires that large of a team. So there are various different types of situations that you will be put into. But what you will have is an opportunity to work as a part of a team, have people who are working with you, help you learn the nuances and learn the ins and outs of what you have to do. Again, so if you look at a typical growth path of a corporate lawyer, you start off there, then you start helping on transaction documents, therefore help put the first draft together, attend negotiations with your partners. A lot of it is just shadowing your partners, a lot like what ends up happening in litigation matters, where you follow your seniors around, watch what they're doing, help them, of course, with the research and help them with everything else. But a lot of it is observation and learning from there and learning the best practices and skills. And that's what happens for the first couple of years as a corporate lawyer as well. There's a lot more drafting that you might end up doing because you're drafting and then you're attending negotiations. But it's very observational. It is working within a team and understanding from the members of the team what is expected of you. After a few years, it again depends. Maybe 4 or 5 years, you get pushed up to a senior associate level. Once you're at a senior associate level, you're expected to take much more responsibility and make sure what comes to a partner to review is of a particular quality. Depending again on the senior associate on the firm, you might end up with a situation where the partner will trust you and ask you to do a few things where he doesn't attend. Therefore, if I have a good senior associate and the client wants a quick call on something, I might tell him, listen, I may not be required for this. Why don't you just take this call on your own? Very similar to litigation, where after a point of time, your senior trusts you enough to say, okay, this is a small application, go and argue it. I don't need to come to court. But a senior associate is expected to help improve the quality, one, of the drafts, and to take some of the loads off the partner. Depending again on the firm, you might end up in a situation where you spend around 4 or 5 years as a senior associate. And then you might move up, and different firms have different areas to move to. Various firms have principal associate designations, various firms have other such designations. AZB doesn't. AZB is associate, senior associate, and partner. And our cards don't even say that. Therefore, my card, when I was an associate, stayed the same when I was a senior associate, and stayed the same when I was a partner, because all it does is have my name, my office address, and my email address. So we don't have those kind of we don't have those details on our cards, and we don't expect we expect people to grow into the role. Therefore, when you become partner, it's more of the same. So when I became partner, it's not that something new came, they handed over keys to the kingdom and said, okay, now you're partner, go do partner like things. you're trained to move into that position gradually. And people have to be comfortable that, the firm has to be comfortable that if I make you a partner today, you have the ability to perform, and therefore clients are happy with you doing their work as a partner, as opposed to saying that, oh, he just became partner last week or last month. Give him give him a little while, he'll grow into that position. So there's a lot of training and grooming that goes into it. Some of the larger firms have actually started formal training programs. Firms like firms outside India, so firms in the UK, I went to Clifford Chance for a while, where they have a very formalized training program. So every associate that comes in, depending on the team that they join, is put into an induction program for a week, where they're trained on various documents. Some of the senior most partners of the firms come and talk to you and explain things to you so that you're not jumping in blind, because they recognize even though you're doing your internships, an internship is being on one side of the table, while when you actually become an associate, it's something else. And therefore, they try to ease you into that position as carefully as possible. For a long time in India, that wasn't a position, but over the past maybe 4 or 5 years, a lot of firms are spending time, money, and effort into knowledge management and training associates. And therefore, this year, for example, we have 45 freshers who joined us. There were courses, and because of COVID, they couldn't go down to one location and attend these courses. But we've conducted that online for them. They've been inducted, they've been trained, and therefore, hopefully, when they actually start working, and they have, they don't come in completely without an idea of what actually gets done within the firm, or how exactly we work. But they come in having some sort of an idea of what exactly gets done, how it is done, how you work within a team, what is expected of you. And I think that makes working within a firm much easier. Like I said, there are different career paths even within firms. There is no guarantee that because you joined in year X, you will become a senior associate in year Y or X plus 4, and you'll become a partner in X plus 10. More often than not, people who join from the same batch end up becoming senior associates in different years, end up becoming partners in different years. And that's purely because of how the firm reviews them, how the firm evaluates their performance and gives them their promotion. So it's not a regimented system where, people thought that if I join now, in 4 years, I will become a senior associate. In 10 years, I will be a partner. Me and my classmates will all be partners at the same time. Increasingly, it doesn't happen. We have partners who are younger than some of our senior associates. They have to work with them. And we have senior associates who become partner much faster than others. But it's an organized system where we have performance reviews which are continuous. We have annual appraisals where partners sit each associate down, give them feedback, tell them where they think they should be improving, how they should be improving, and giving them a path saying that, this year you've done this, this is what we want to see from you next year. And if you continue progressing like this, hopefully in 3 years' time, you will get to where you want to be. So while we try to articulate a career path, it's not the same for every person. It depends on what that person is doing, how well he's doing, how well we believe he's doing, and what we believe is his ability to progress and make it to the next path. There are people, as you know, any law firm is like a pyramid. You have a lot of associates, not all of them end up becoming partners or senior associates or partners at the same time. So it's once you join a law firm doesn't mean that you're automatically given, you can take it for granted that you'll get to a position at some point of time. Again, so just giving you, since we're talking about career paths, I'll give you mine because that's what I'm most closely, that's what I know best. So I started working with a corporate law firm so I graduated in 2003, did corporate litigation for 3 years, started working for 3.5 years, started working for a corporate firm in 2007, made partner in 4 years, and I've been a partner for the past 10 years. Again, that was a different time. It's not, the firms were much smaller. So when I wanted a job, I spoke to a few of my friends. They said, write to Zia. So I sent Zia Modi an email. And then surprise, the next morning when I checked my email, I had an answer from her saying, yes, I've heard of you from your friends who work with me. And that advantage was, so she spoke to a few of my friends. They said, yeah, he's a nice guy. Hopefully they said that. And so she said, okay, come interview. And she interviewed me personally. As the firm has gotten bigger, obviously, and we recruit a lot more people, obviously she can't do those personal interviews. She does that for some people, but again, it's a rigorous interview process. It's not very simple, because your CV can only tell someone a few things. It's 2 pages, and I think as we've recruited and as we've had experience, we realize that a CV is not the sole criteria to judge people. But your CV should be sufficiently interesting and intriguing that you're called for an interview. AZB, for example, now it's not Zia who does most interviews. There are partners who are designated as HR partners who carry out those interviews. Even for freshers, there are interviews for freshers before we choose them. So I joined AZB in that situation, and then I moved up through the ranks faster than where people are moving right now, primarily because the firm was much smaller when I joined. It was a large firm for Indian standards, but I remember when I joined our Bombay office, we had 75 associates, I think 75 people in all, including associates and partners, which I thought was very large. But if I look at our Bombay office right now, we have more than 200 people in the office. So maybe over the last 15 years, we've grown fourfold. We've grown around fourfold. So the firm has grown much faster, and therefore those positions have gotten tighter. Competition has gotten more. The market has gotten more sophisticated, and therefore, as the firm gets larger, the track to partnership usually takes longer. Again, so like I was saying, career paths depend again on the size of the firm. Smaller firms may actually give you a faster career path. Smaller firms need not necessarily mean worse. Big need not be best. Like Vikas mentioned, there are boutique firms where people have decided that we don't want to be all things for all people. We do not want to have the 28 practice areas that AZB has. We know that we can do these 5 practice areas, and we can do it as well as any other firm in India, if not in the world. And therefore, you have increasingly boutique firms opening, saying that these are areas of law that we're good in. These are what we'll specialize in. We've worked in other firms. We have clients who believe that we can provide the same standards and the same quality that a larger firm can provide, but with more personalized attention, because we're not a big law firm. We're a medium size, or we're a boutique firm, and therefore increasingly you find boutique firms opening on specialized areas of law. So you have firms that do just financial regulatory law. So financial and securities law, especially in Bombay, you'll find firms that are really good at that, and that's all they do. Again, if I take the Bombay example, there are firms there, and they've always been there, that just do shipping law. They do nothing but shipping law, and they're very, very good at shipping. And shipping law is not just international trade, but when they do shipping law, they do ship financing, for example, hull financing. And they're very good at it, because they specialize in that. They do that day in and day out. They're in the market every day, and they have great reputation and great quality. And therefore, when people are looking at firms, please don't just look at large corporate law firms. Yes, those are obviously the ones that gather the most attention because of the size and because of the kind of profile that they have. But while you're interning, speak to your friends, ask around. People who have graduated a few years back, who are in the market, who are in those cities, will know that there are firms that have this great reputation at what they do. They may not be as well known as other firms, but they have great reputations, and they're successful. And when they're successful, they take care of their people, because at the end of the day, the lawyers we have are our number one asset. And therefore, when you're looking at looking at a firm to work for, or you're looking at a firm to apply to, don't just apply to the big ones. Again, so like I said, boutique firms, niche area of practices, quality work. A lot of my friends work for boutique firms over the years. They moved out of big law firms because, like I said, when we started doing corporate law, there were only a handful of people doing corporate work. But there are people who have trained in those firms and then moved out and set up their own. And then there are people who have joined them. And therefore, now you have a plethora of boutique firms who do very good work and who are very successful at what they do. And therefore, it's not a question of, a lot of people, when they look at it as law students especially, They look at it and say, no, I've heard of these people. I've seen that deal in the news in Legally India. I saw that deal on Bar and Bench, and that was AZB, or that was CAM, or that was SAM, or that was a JSA that did that deal, and that's where I want to work. Yeah, we're extremely happy to be in those positions. We're extremely happy to have the kind of work we have. But as a law student, I would actually advise people not to just look at those at the top 10 large firms, but speak to your friends, speak to your seniors who are in a particular market. Find out from them, what are the other firms, what are the firms that have good reputation for quality work, and apply to them as well. Yeah. Again, so I think one of the other areas that was asked, and I see there are a bunch of questions coming up. I see there's a bunch of feedback as well. I'll take those questions right at the end. And I don't intend to speak for more than 5 more minutes, and then I'll start taking questions, because the whole point of this was to get students who are interested in corporate law to ask their questions, and hopefully I can give them some guidance. How is corporate law different from litigation? One, yes, the law is the same, but if you look at the softer aspects, if you look at the skill sets that you need to develop, I think the best example I can give you is that if you are litigating, you want to convince the judge that the other side is wrong, and therefore we're all going out aggressively and fighting and shouting and making the other side look bad, or trying to make the other side look bad before the judge, so the judge rules in your favor. When you're doing corporate law, especially when you're doing transactional work, what you end up doing is you're negotiating with someone, and therefore if I'm negotiating with you, I want something that you have, and you want something that I have. And therefore, I need to convince you to give me what I want, and you need to convince me to give you what you want. And hopefully we reach a middle ground somewhere where you don't get everything you want, I don't get everything I want, but we're both satisfied with what we get. So as a corporate lawyer, you end up in a situation where you're not being aggressive with the other side. You're not trying to score points so that your client thinks you're a great corporate lawyer. You're trying to, especially if you're doing a transaction, your client is interested in getting a deal done. He doesn't want you to make the other lawyer look bad. And so it's a different mindset. It's a more collaborative effort. That's on the transactional side. On the advisory side, again, as corporate lawyers, you're advising companies. Different companies have different levels of that they're comfortable taking risk at. So when you're advising your client, you need to know your client, you need to know the field of your client, and you need to know your client's risk appetite as you advise your client, in order that the client can actually get practical advice that actually helps the client, as opposed to a memo on law that doesn't give the client the answer. The answer may be no, you can't do something. But if you put it and obfuscate it to that extent that, I'll give you the law, now you try to understand what you have to do, that doesn't help anybody. So when we teach people and we try to train people in giving advice to clients, we have to point out to the client that some areas of law are gray. But the fact is that the client is not looking at you to give them to demonstrate your knowledge. Answer as to whether they can do something, whether they should be doing something, or how they should be protecting themselves from something else. So we try to get our colleagues to give advice that is as practical as possible. So those are some of the skills that you need to develop. I keep getting asked, what are the top skills that a corporate lawyer needs to have? I think that the skill that is number one, at least when I look at it, and we're talking to lawyers and interviewing them, what we need to see is that the lawyer has the right attitude, is diligent. Like I said, there is this entire exercise that we conduct and law firms make a lot of money off, which is due diligence, which is examining thousands of pages of records to try and see whether there are any hidden skeletons in the cupboard before your client buys a company. As a corporate lawyer, we look to people who are diligent. We need them to have the ability to. It involves a lot of, like any other area of law, involves a lot of paperwork, involves a lot of reading the same document again and again, because when you're negotiating a document, I will mark it up, send it to you, you will look at it, send it back to me, and therefore attention to detail ends up being very important. Then we look at people who actually have the ability to persevere. It is sometimes, at least at a junior level, ends up being work that some people may think as mind-numbing. You might end up, most corporate firms have this reputation of having long hours, Therefore, you start early in the morning and you work through the night. It doesn't happen every day, but it does happen often enough. And at the junior level, you might end up spending more time in office than your seniors do, primarily because you're the one who they're relying on to do all the reading and to come and brief them on matters, therefore making their life a little more easier. So we need people who have the stamina, who have the intention to say that, I will persevere. I will continue doing this for a few years until I learn this well enough that I can move up the chain. So it's almost like, if you look at Karate Kid, they get trained on something crazy and then they move up, and then those skills that they learned doing the things that they did for the first few years are what end up being the foundation for the rest of their career. And if you spend that first few years with your nose to the ground, working hard and knowing that I will work hard, I will pick up these skills and I will learn. It gets your responsibilities might may become more and more as you grow older and as you get more senior. But it gets more exciting. You get to see better quality of work. You get to do the more at least what I find the more interesting things. Even though the responsibility, of course, increases exponentially as you get more senior. The last bit that I thought I'll speak about before we open to questions is technology and the law. It's not yet reached that scale in India, but a lot of us in law firms keep looking at the West because we look at law firms in the West as being somewhere that we believe we will be in the next few years, not just on the side of quality, but on the side of where they are progressing, how their systems are evolving. Firms in the West, especially large law firms in the West, are very system driven. They're also increasingly adopting technology to help out. And you'll be surprised, we have firms in India as well who are doing this. I know Sirla Machan Mangaldas set up a legal incubator to help improve legal technology. Therefore, there are startups there, and you'll be surprised to see that there are startups that are saying that title diligence, what I'll do is take all the documents, a checklist that is there, I will put them into a scanner, use optical character recognition and artificial intelligence, and prepare a first draft report that a lawyer can then take that first draft, pick up the documents, and basically preparing the report himself, the lawyer gets this pre-prepared report, then looks at the documents to see whether the pre-prepared report actually meets the requirements, is actually accurate. Because today the technology has not yet reached the stage that you can rely on it that much. But I was mind blown to be told that you can take these documents from the sub-registrar's office, feed them into a scanner, and get a report out that way. And well, that's a great it's a great technological advancement. But if the technology actually gets more efficient, there might be less work for lawyers, though there might be work that is obviously the more interesting work as opposed to the more mind-numbing work of data entry. So technology is changing the way lawyers work across the world. It will start changing the way we work. Technology has already changed the way our litigators work right now with virtual hearings, with the ability to work virtually on systems as opposed to having stacks of files and papers. A lot of lawyers, including senior counsel I know, have now decided that they'll use this opportunity to migrate everything to their iPads and work just off that. And therefore, technology is changing the way lawyers work today. But the way I see it, in the next few years, it's going to be a sea change. People are adopting this technology. Lawyers are notoriously slow to adopt technology, but when we do, I think lawyers will then go both feet in and adopt technology in a manner that makes the more mind-numbing work be delegated to technology, while the lawyer actually does the interesting and value addition. And that's where I see us a few years from now. If we want to take questions now, I know I've not addressed everything that everyone wanted to hear. Again, this was prepared primarily to address students who are looking to start off with corporate work. But I'm happy to address questions that I know there are a lot of advocates who have registered for the session as well, and a lot of people who may not be students. I'm happy to take questions and try to answer them to the best of my ability.
Yes, sir. So thank you so much, sir, for having, on behalf of the Career Development Cell, I extend an immense sense of gratitude to be talking to you. And this question comes, as various components, and I'm going to merge them, so that we can touch upon different concepts, which is that, there are some there is some classification within the law schools that prevails, which is like top tier law schools, and then there are top 2-tier law schools. And the curriculum design is very, very different. In some colleges, the curriculum design is such that the corporate laws are taught, in the final years and not in the beginning years, as opposed to some colleges in which corporate laws are taught in parts, since the beginning, since the yesteryears, which is why a vast majority of the students face a kind of disadvantage when applying to firms, when they start preparing to apply for firms in their third year, by the middle of the third year, the end of the third year. So I asked this question, that what can a law student in their journey do, and what are the means and the resources available at their disposal, in light of, and I asked this question in light of high entry barriers when it comes to getting into corporate sector, whether it is a boutique law firm or it's a top law firm, one of the best law firms in the country. So I'm asking this question in reference to this, as well as the current pandemic situation, wherein anyways there's a hiring freeze that is going on. So how does a candidate stand out, and what can one do to work on themselves from a resume point of view, as well as preparing oneself for
Sure.
that stage?
Yeah. So interesting question, and not something that large law firms are not aware of. We do realize, and again, there is this perception that large law firms only hire from the NLUs. It's it's not without merit, because we end up hiring a lot from the NLUs. But the fact is that we have people who have come from a lot of other firms, a lot of other law schools as well. But again, taking your question, which is what do you do if you're not being taught corporate law in your third year? Again, so it's a situation where, if we look at the life of a corporate lawyer, the Companies Act is only a very small portion of what we end up doing. The subjects and the basis and the basics and our foundation building stones as a corporate lawyer, at least my experience as a corporate lawyer, is that you pick those up from at least the subjects that I studied in my first year, which was contract law, because your drafting is primarily contract law, and that's and then the Sale of Goods Act, because if you're buying and selling shares, it is the Sale of Goods Act, because shares are movable property. They're bought and sold, and therefore you need to know the Sale of Goods Act. It's the Contract Act, and those are your building blocks. Yes, knowing there is no substitute to knowing the Companies Act as well, because if you only know how to draft a contract without knowing whether that contract is going to be enforceable or work for a company, it doesn't help. But if you learn what, and maybe law schools may want to consider changing their curriculum around to help people study corporate law courses a little earlier. But the way I see it is that we don't expect lawyers or rather law students third year, or at least I don't, and I handle internships out of Bangalore with a team, because we just have so many applications. So me, along with the team with whom I handle internships, we do not expect the interns in the third year to have a working understanding of Companies Act. We hope that they understand, they understand how a contract works, at least on the transactional side, and they can read and therefore understand conceptually what we're trying to achieve. And therefore, if we don't look at just the fact that you've studied corporate law in your third year, and therefore we choose you over somebody who hasn't studied corporate law in their third year. It's not something that actually, at least to me, doesn't make my decision as to whether I should get somebody to intern for us in the third year or not. But the fact is that corporate law is more than just a Companies Act. If people actually study their basic core subjects that they're being taught in their law schools in their first year and the second year and third year, and come to a corporate law firm, they're not going to find themselves completely out of water. Like I said, we do not expect you to know the law in your third year, or know corporate law in your third year. Therefore, it's not something that you need to worry about too much. Yes, will it help if you studied corporate law? It will, and the Companies Act, it will, but it's not something that you need to worry about too much. What I would recommend is that you focus on the subjects you've already studied and make sure you have a good understanding of those, because that is what will then help you layer corporate law on top of it.
Right. So, and then coming again to me,
Sure, Puneet.
many young students, especially those who are learning their LLB course, if you can throw some light on risk and fraud mitigation and career in compliance management.
Sure. And that's an extremely interesting question, and that's an extremely interesting subject. So we actually and let me give you the example that AZB, for example, over the last, I think, 5 years, has set up a team that does white collar crimes and investigations, where compliance hasn't worked, and therefore we get called in to help with an investigation. We have a small team that does that. The big four, chartered accountancy or financial advisors, your Deloittes and KPMGs of the world, have much larger team that do that. That's an area of law that is developing, which is developing very fast. But that is when something goes bad. Compliance, like you're saying, is a situation where people are looking at it, and compliance officers, by many large companies are now appointing compliance officers as the regulatory landscape gets more and more complex. It's not good enough to just have somebody who because he's been with the company, knows what he's doing, and therefore as the company has grown, he's also grown. There are a lot of lawyers who have now become chief compliance officers in companies. They've of course worked in various different areas before doing that. It's a very I have the greatest respect for the compliance officer, because the amount of responsibility that's on his shoulders is immense. Depending on the sector that a company is in, if you're in a sector that is heavily regulated, the compliance officer's job is not a very easy one, but it is a supremely exciting job. You are the gatekeeper. You are the one who has to make sure, one, the company is acting in compliance with the regulations that the company should act in, and two, making sure that the company is not being taken for a ride by people. Those are the two things. And like most compliance officers like to say, if you think compliance is expensive, imagine the cost of non-compliance. And we've seen situations that my corporate investigation team has seen, that what people thought was a minor non-compliance in an MNC has ended up costing the client crores. Therefore, that's an area that's developing. Again, so when I started practicing, it wasn't something that had developed to the extent it has. But if you look at it, most large corporations, especially in heavily regulated sectors, have compliance departments, not just one compliance officer.
Yeah. Simran, you had one more question. You can ask that, Simran.
Yes, sir. The second question is dealing with the importance of having a master's degree in a specific area, because you highlighted that in the early part of the session, which is that it can be a general practice, but it also gradually segregates into different specific fields of law. So this is a very practical question. And I just we can sort of clear the air around this, that if a person who gets into a law firm, if a fresh law graduate gets into a law firm and wishes to undertake his or her master's in due course of time, maybe after 2 years or 3 years or 2.5 years, whatever the work experience, for how long the work experience one seeks to get, will the firm hire that person knowing that this person will eventually would want to pursue their masters, and then eventually wants to come back? So what is the rate of acceptance in that situation?
Okay. So practically, and you should know it more. You should know it. Most people won't tell the law firm that are applying that they're applying to that they intend to do a master's in 3 years.
Okay.
Again, but the law firms again are. We've seen, like I said, this year's intake is 40 people. We've seen tens of people come in and go every year. We know that some of the brightest ones will have the intention of doing an LLM. It's something that we have at the back of our mind even when we recruit them, because we know that a lot of them do it. So we've had colleagues who after 3 years left, gone, done their LLMs. Some of them are working abroad, and we're very happy because they send us work after that, because they worked with us. So even though a lot of people don't tell us, at least some of the larger law firms know that we will lose a few people to their LLMs. We hope that we are the kind of firm that once they're done with their LLM, they want to come back and help us monetize their newly acquired skill sets. but it doesn't always happen, and then I think we've gotten used to the fact that a few of them may not. So the fact that someone is going for an LLM is something that we mostly have at the back of our mind, and we hope that well, if they do, one, we hope that they find the work interesting enough to see that you may not need an LLM in the area of law that you're practicing in. And if they do, and we have people who have gone and done the LLMs, we're happy to see some of them come back to us. We've had people who decided they wanted to go for the LLM. The firm was very upset because not because they didn't tell us, but because they were such valued resources that when you're working with somebody for several years, you don't want them to go. But they went and they came back in a year, and they're partners now. So it's not it's not something that yes, does the firm want you to go after the firm had trained you? Ideally not. But we know that we can't keep people if they don't want to be there, and if they do not want to be in my office and spending and if their hearts are not in it, then spending 12 hours a day and sometimes more a day, working weekends on occasion, becomes very difficult if their heart's not in it. So it's very difficult to keep people away from going there, and if they want to develop and they want to improve themselves, they should.
Right. So now we have, I guess, Swati, who wants to.
We will unmute Swati. Swati.
Hello, good evening to everyone.
Hi, Swati.
Hi. So, sir, I'm currently in my third year.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know, so we hear a lot about what we should do if we want to secure an internship in, say, top tier law firms like AZB, for example. But I would like to know from a person working there, from a person like you, what does the firm actually see in students when they apply for internships, and what makes the students who get selected stand out actually? Um, so
Sure.
please put some light on that. Thank you.
Sure. So, like I said, I'm part of the team that selects interns. Because of the sheer volume of applications that our Bangalore office gets, we have 4 people, 4 associates, the same 4 people from the firm who actually look at internship applications. Because, like I said, for any law firm, the quality of the resources that it has is its major asset. That said, once you get in for your internship, then you have the ability to spend time and show the associates you're working with how good you are. But getting that internship, we recognize, is difficult. Just giving you an example, I think we take around 7 or 8 interns a month in Bangalore, because having more doesn't make sense. It doesn't do justice to the interns. Because they don't get enough of work, and they're just sitting there, and hopefully at the end of the month they'll get their certificate saying that they interned with us, but it doesn't do justice. But for those 7 or 8 slots, on an average we get around 4 to 5 applications a day. So imagine we have 100 and around 140, 150 applications coming in every month for 7 or 8 slots, and that's where we end up having to do some sort of a filtration where we look at a CV. The CV, again, so I'm not going to beat around the bush. What we do look for in the CV is to see how well they're doing at academics, because that's what counts when you're working with a law firm. And see that, but that's not the only criteria. Your CV has to be able to give us in the 2 pages that we like seeing, and we don't like seeing larger CVs. It should give us the fact that, one, you have the ability and you have the academic background. We don't expect everyone to be a topper in their class. Not everyone is. I wasn't even close. But we expect to have people who have some amount of, at least a middle of the road academic ability. But then we look at what else they've been able to do co-curricular, to the extent that they've been able to publish. It helps us take a look and see that this person is not somebody who's just keeping his head down and studying and trying to get best marks, but is trying to make the most of his law school education and trying to write his articles, trying to moot. I know a lot of mooters who, at least from the batches that I studied with, who once they finish law school, I don't think they've stepped into a courtroom. They've become very successful corporate lawyers. A lot of them have gone to courts. A lot of them are doing very successfully in court. But what we do see is, even for corporate law, we look to see what co-curricular activities that they've been in, and that is something I think if we look at a CV, I can't say we give X number of points to your grade points versus X number to co-curricular activities. The way your CV is drafted and the fact that there are no typos and it's well written also makes a difference. So I think at least when you're applying for internships, please do spend time working on your CV. Don't do what I did, which was borrow my friend's CV, cut and paste my name on top of it, and chapo it and send it out. When I was interning, I think the firm that I went to got maybe 4 or 5 applications a year, because at that time not many people were interning. I got lucky, but if a firm, imagine if I'm going through, or if my team has to go through 150, I'm quite certain the larger offices are going through many more applications than that. So please work on that application. Please make it look, well, it doesn't have to look fancy, but it should be crisp, easy to read, and it should show a law firm that you're somebody who has academic rigor and has the ability to actually be a part of a team, and not just for that internship. Because when we look at it, and when we look at people coming to us, every intern is a potential recruit. So please work on your CVs, and working on the CV doesn't mean that just pick up mindless designations and put it in, or pick up things that are mindless. Think of what the person who's reading the CV needs to look at, and think of what he's looking at you for. He's not looking at you. He's looking at you to see whether you have the ability to be an intern who can come in and perform.
Thank you so much, sir, for touching on such intricate details, which one must keep in mind. And this is, before we move on to the next people who have 2 sets of questions, this is a question that is coming from my teacher, who also is one of the faculty coordinators back at CDC, and she specializes in health laws. And she wants to ask that what is the workload in terms of cases from hospitals that is coming in light of the medical negligence, and she wants to know about the flow of these cases, and how the relevance of corporate law practice in terms of these companies, that the cases of insurance and negligence that come from these hospitals. So she wants to know that from that perspective.
Okay. So while I've only dealt with a few cases, not where I am right now, especially on health law and medical negligence, for example. It is an area of law that other law firms, especially law firms that have more corporate litigation focus. And there are firms like that in Bangalore who are corporate law firms, but they have very strong corporate litigation teams and old ties with old hospitals, and they end up doing a lot of those kind of matters. And there is more and more work right now on the health side, and not just from the litigation aspect, but from health and safety. It again goes back to this compliance issue that we were discussing. We know that the government, for example, and I'm just taking the COVID example, came out and every state, for example, had different rules as to what you should do when you reopen. And not from a hospital perspective, but I'm looking at it from a perspective of clients like my clients, for example, that run industrial establishments. And so there was a lot of work that came to us as corporate lawyers, because my clients are companies, on how can I reopen safely? What do I need to get done? The government is coming and saying that I want to set up a camp inside your facility so that I can conduct COVID tests. Am I actually required to allow them to do that? Because my employees are getting scared if someone is standing at the gate and saying, I won't let you in until you're tested. So those are the kind of areas that I end up having to deal with personally. But I know from friends, and I think that's the best and most reliable indicator as on what it's like. I know that a lot of people have a lot more matters on the medical negligence side. Right now, there is a backlog because people are not filing because of COVID. But people are expecting the floodgates to open soon.
Right. Exactly. That gives us the exact situation as in where the healthcare sector is located. And now we have Mr. Akshay and then Mr. Rangat, who can now put forth their questions to sir. So you need to unmute.
First, we will take Mr. Puneet Sharma. He has one question. Mr. Puneet, and then we will have Akshay. Akshay, you can also get yourself unmuted. Mr. Puneet.
Yeah, I think all the aspects of this particular topic has been very well covered and beautifully explained. I think a person, from the student's perspective, things have been covered very well. No more queries from my end.
Thank you, Puneet. Thank you, Puneet bhai. Now, Akshay, you can get yourself unmuted to ask the question.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So my question is, so since you said something about being a compact, there being a compact CV. Now I have working experience of more than 6 years and internships at several places, and I just can't fit that into 2 pages. So how do I how do I make it compact?
You have
Another
to.
thing is.
Sure. No,
Yeah,
give me the second one.
One more thing.
Yeah.
So I
Sorry,
just wanted
Akshay,
to know.
your voice is cracking. Akshay?
Hello.
Are you here? Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So
Please.
another thing I want to know is, with the experience of corporate law in India, is there a scope for a job in corporate law abroad, especially in the Commonwealth countries?
There is. So, okay, let me take the first one first. So you have 6 years of working, therefore you are not just a student. You've been practicing law for a fairly long time. But let me tell you, we have to share our CVs as well. As a lawyer and as a corporate lawyer, we have a lot of clients, and I'm giving just my example where we have clients from abroad. We have a lot of large companies in India as well, who don't just come to us because we are AZB. They want to know the experience of the lawyer that they're working with, because they're not working with AZB, a firm. They know that they will be working with a partner and a team of lawyers, and therefore they want to see our CVs as well. And my CV, Akshay, and I've been working for 17 years now, is 2 pages. It's not easy, but at the end of the day, you should know that, as opposed to giving me, and we used to make fun of one of our partners who had a 5-page CV. And what he would do with that 5-page CV, but it was interesting, because every time a client asked for a CV, he'd go look at what the client does. Now with Google, you know exactly what clients do, and then pick out from a CV the relevant portions and put it into 2 pages. So and that is what I would suggest. I know it requires you, each year and each opportunity that you had must be very important. But look at it from a situation that, if you put 4 pages, then people will just skim after reading the first page, will skim through the second and not read the third and the fourth. So you have to learn to summarize. You have to do a certain value judgment. Therefore, after 6 years, listing out all your internships from your first year may not make sense. You may want to choose what you think will be, know your reader and choose from what you think is most relevant to the person you're sending your CV. That would at least be the tip that I give you. It's not impossible. I know it's difficult, but it's not impossible. The second question, as to opportunities outside India, I think, and I've seen friends of mine going abroad and working. I think the ability to migrate from one jurisdiction to another is available more in the corporate world, and is available to litigators. As a litigator, as somebody who started his career as a litigator, I know how difficult it is to even move from one jurisdiction in the country to another. So people practicing on the original side in Bombay, friends of mine, when they came to Bangalore and wanted to practice here, had to relearn the CPC. Because in Bombay, you don't spend too much of time, especially if you're spending time in the High Court, you don't really go to the CPC. But I have classmates and I have friends who started their careers in India. Therefore, these are not people who went abroad, did their LLMs and then started working abroad. These are people who started working in law firms in India. In 2 or 3 years' time, managed to jump to another country and are now partners in some of the Magic Circle firms across the world. So the ability to migrate from one jurisdiction to another is there.
Mr. Anand, though during our time there were no certificates, courses, etc., and how many webinars you have attended. Since Simran and all the team had shared with me that what is the relevance of the attendance of webinars, because like we have been doing a lot of webinars at the initial stages, we used to get a lot of messages saying therein that kindly start the process of also issuing the certificate. And during that time, I read it on the LinkedIn. It said, thankfully, during the Mahabharata's time, there was no concept of issuing of the certificates. Even otherwise, Eklavya would have asked that they should issue him a certificate because he has attended the course through on an offline, from a distance course from Dronacharya. So how relevant courses, because a lot of time, if you start issuing these certificates, I've seen, since we were never issuing it, a lot of time it so happens that students do simplest and the auto-generated certificate comes. Does it actually help it, or you as a recruiter also you are able to gauge that fact that this person is actually not having this, though he's having a certificate, but he's actually not possessing that knowledge on that aspect?
Yeah. So again, I kind of tend to agree with you. What, at least as we, like I said, it's not that we started recruiting yesterday or started looking at interns yesterday. We've been doing it for years. We get hundreds of CVs every month, and we spend time going through it. So after a point, you can pick up that people have just, and then you'll find people with several certifications that are listed on their CVs, which may not really make sense, because it may not add it. Some of them might add value, but in a lot of cases, personally speaking, those certifications really on your CV doesn't make too much of a difference when I'm looking at your CV. What if there are a few and they're focused? Maybe yes, it helps me when I'm looking at somebody in his not in his third year, but looking at somebody in his fourth or the fifth year. I see that this person, and this is before COVID, before the online webinars and certifications became as popular as they are right now. But you see people who have done single credit courses, people who have attended workshops. So therefore, you understand, that person may have some sort of an interest in that subject that is over and above what they teach them in their college. And does that help? Yes, that intrigues me. It doesn't actually, we then speak to the candidate, and when they're interning with us, they're not just brought in, put in a corner and left. We have a rigorous process of the candidate comes, is made sure work is given to them, and the associates who work with that candidate fill out a feedback form. So it's not that, because you have 3 courses on your CV, but you attended, like you said, they log in so that they get the certification. That's not going to take you very far. If you're doing those courses because you genuinely want to learn something, and that translates as to when you're interning with us, we see that okay, this chap is familiar with something. He knows a little more than his classmates otherwise would have known. That counts.
Yeah. We have Mahesh Desai. We'll ask Mahesh to unmute himself.
Good evening for this platform. A quick question, keeping the time in view. If someone is employed in a company and responsible for the part of the legal team, and can he or she can again go back to the court and practice as an advocate? Can he eligible in a bar council to get it admitted?
If you have a degree, and I think you have to suspend your sanad while you're in-house. And as a corporate lawyer, you're not, but I'm assuming you're talking about an in-house position. There are people, and there are several people who have, after retirement or have left jobs and started practicing. It used to be more common a few years back, where people who did degrees and then went into government service, once they retired or once they decided to take voluntary retirement, come back and start practicing. So legal officers in state-run corporations, for example, a lot of them used to come back into practice. I know a few myself who practice in Karnataka.
All right, but if someone is employed in a private company, still he's
no, it doesn't matter where you were employed. The fact is that you can come back into employment. The advantage that the people from the state-run corporations have is that their former colleagues may send them work.
Correct. Thank you.
We have Iftikhar. He wants to ask a question.
Yeah. Good evening, sir. My name is Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed. You were talking about a medical legal case. Yes. Me being from the medical profession actually, and now I'm pursuing law. What do you suggest? I'm interested in this medical legal, maybe medical negligence or anything. So should I be doing LLM? And in that case, in which subject, and could you just guide me on that, because now I'm
So do
doing.
you intend, so medical legal, do you intend to practice on medical malpractice, or what do you intend to do? So your education is to help you practice, or to actually join the profession. So what would you like to do? Don't educate yourself and then decide what you want to do later.
No, what I want your suggestion is, see, now that I'm a doctor, now I'm pursuing
Yes.
law.
Yeah.
I either I can do medical profession, or I should practice law. I have to leave medical profession and come to law
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
Is there something where I can use both, use my medical knowledge as well as my law knowledge and do
Yes.
something? And what do you suggest?
Yes, so medical malpractice matters are definitely matters where the fact that the lawyer has in-depth experience on medical malpractice helps him, as opposed to having to get a doctor to brief him before he goes and argues a matter. So does it help? It will help you in matters like that, where if you decide to focus on medical malpractices and medical legal cases, that is possible. There are areas that are also opening up, which include regulations of hospital, for example, and therefore the various regulatory aspects dealing with hospitals, from their blood banks to their pharmacies, to the fact that a hospital which has an MRI machine requires certain government approvals. If you have radiotropic isotopes in your hospital, you need approval from the Atomic Energy Department. And somebody who has worked in a hospital and is more familiar with that, with how a hospital operates, that the broad base that you have will definitely help you.
So after LLB, what is the way forward? I mean, I have to do
It depends again. So if you want to practice law, you do not need to do an LLM. An LLM is specialized. If you intend to do an LLM, again, in a lot of cases, it may not be classroom based. You might end up doing a dissertation and thesis, even at the LLM level. So it's very difficult for me to give you to answer that question saying that this is what I believe you should be doing. You'll have to see whether you believe that you're in a position, once you finish your bachelor's degree, to say that, okay, I am confident I will work with a senior for a little while, and then I will be doing my own cases. Or if you believe that you require a little more specialization where an LLM will help. It's not a decision that is easy, and it's definitely not a decision that I can tell you do one or the other on a video conference.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Rangat, Simran, Rangat, we will ask Rangat too.
Yes, sir. I think he's unable to unmute himself. That's why he asked me to ask the question.
Rangat is unmuted. Yeah.
Okay, he's unmuted. Perfect. Fine.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Before Rangat, before you ask the question, I think Siva has had his hand up for a long time. So after Rangat, if you can ask Siva, that'll be helpful. Yeah. Rangat,
Sure,
please go on.
Sir, I am a advocate who's been practicing for the last 3-4 years now, and I was planning on switching to the corporate sector. In such a case, what kind of a CV or a profile would a corporate law firm be expecting out of an advocate?
See, the one thing I'll tell you, and I did exactly the same thing. So like I said, I spent my first 3 years doing litigation, but I was doing corporate litigation. So I was doing a lot of matters before the High Court on the company side. And I was doing operation and mismanagement matters before the NCLT. And therefore, I had, at least while I wasn't actually litigating, I wasn't actually doing corporate transactional work, I had some sort of an inkling as to what it involves, because I also had colleagues. I was still working in the firm, so I had colleagues who were doing only corporate work. So I had some sort of an inkling. But when I joined AZB, I was very honest. I told them, well, this is what I've been doing, and hopefully this will help me move from doing just corporate litigation to doing corporate transactional work. And the firm took a chance, because see, your CV, especially if you're moving, at least I'm again giving you just my personal example, people may or may not agree with it. Your CV, when you're moving laterally after 3 or 4 years, is just an introduction to people asking you, to having an interview with you and trying to gauge what exactly you know. Therefore, if you have worked on the corporate side, Rangat, and therefore even on the litigation side, if you've done amalgamations, you've done matters before the NCLT, you've done matters involving companies, I would suggest that you give them the focus on those. and tell them, see, I want to move to corporate law, but this is what I have done, and hopefully this will stand me in good stead and give me some sort of a background so that I can start doing corporate work. At 3 years, it's not very difficult, but you have to again think of yourself as a fresher again. That's what I did, because like I said, while I've litigated, being able to read a document and being able to draft it are two completely different things. I treated myself as a fresher. And I started. I figured that the experience that I had helped me, and maybe I moved up faster than a fresher would have moved, because I had some amount of experience. But I didn't come in saying that I'm a 4-year lawyer and therefore on the corporate side I'm also a 4-year lawyer.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, we have unmuted Shiva.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sir. Thank you for this session, sir. I'm finally pursuing a final year LLB, and my question is, I'm also pursuing a company secretary course, sir. And how much is a company pursuing LLB with company secretaries is useful for a corporate lawyer, sir? That's all, sir.
I think it's useful. The fact that you're studying the secretarial practices helps you understand and helps you know processes and procedures. Therefore, let me take an example. If we're talking about an M&A transaction, in an M&A transaction, you might either have a fresh issuance of shares or have a transfer of shares. The fact that you know the process that is required from a Companies Act perspective to either issue fresh shares or to transfer shares helps. It makes you more familiar with how companies operate, the nitty-gritties of actual secretarial compliances that a company needs to do. And for transactional work, I think that is interesting, and that's important, because again, as a lawyer, you learn a lot of this once you start working as well. But the fact that you do a secretarial course and know that for a transfer and undertaking, you need if you need a special resolution or you need an ordinary resolution, whether you need shareholder consents for certain things, whether you need to have that decision taken at a board meeting or a circular resolution is sufficient. All of this, the fact that you are a company secretary will make you more familiar with, and therefore make it easier for you to start doing these things first.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, that said, again, for people who aren't doing it, it's not essential. You do learn these things on the job, but if you've learned these things while you are studying, it makes it easier for you to fit in.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Right. So all of these questions resonated with distinct and I guess a plethora of dilemmas that each one of us is facing on their own level and within our own situations. So one of the questions that also is coming from the student side is that when is the right time for the final year law students to start applying, for whether for traineeship contracts or for assessment internships in the firms? Like, what is the timeline? A basic, uniform timeline that one can follow, like that determines a lot of approaches one takes in terms of working on their applications.
Sure, that's an interesting question, because increasingly, people have got their job by the time, at least in the NLUs, they get and we recruit, because the day zero keeps going back. As I remember when I was studying, our recruitment process happened in the final trimester. Now I know it happens in the 4th year. And therefore, a lot of law firms also do not plan to recruit this year, only this year. That the plan and the pipeline of students that we're looking to recruit starts off earlier. We like to recruit people who have interned with us, but we also go to colleges and recruit and look at students, especially freshers from colleges, straight out of college. And we do most of our recruitment a year in advance. Therefore, if you intend to, and it again depends, some firms don't. And then if you send your application 1 year in advance and they tell you come back and you forget about it, it won't work. So it depends on which firm you're applying to. The larger firms, in my experience, again, all start recruiting their people by the 4th year. Some of the other firms do it later, because they don't have a fixed policy of it. They look at how work is going, how life is going, and then recruit. And therefore, depending on where you're applying, you should start applying early. Again, focus on the internships, because that will help you get your foot in the door. And therefore make your CV not just a CV that comes in without any reference, but is a CV that when we put back into our system, We know that this person is interned with us. The feedback that that person has got while interning is good, and therefore we're willing to take a chance.
Right. So in our hands lies our own entry points, and that so that we can break down those barriers for ourselves with our own hard work, which is planning well and proceeding with the plan of action.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's easy. It's I know it's difficult. I'm glad I'm on this side of the table as opposed to that side now. Life was much simpler when I started applying. But the fact is, like I said, there is no one size fits all formula for when you should apply and when you should and when you shouldn't, because there is no one size fits all law firm either. There are law firms of various sizes and shapes, and therefore each of them has a time of when you should apply. Please do your research as to which firm you want to apply to. Know why you're applying to them, because one of the questions we ask a lot of people is, why do you want to work with us? That's our question to people, and well, if most answers we get are like, you're AZB, you're known as one of the best law firms in the country, and this and that, the other. But if you do not, you should have, we like to see someone who's put in that effort to prepare for the interview. Who's taken the effort and therefore knows a little more about the office, or knows a little more about the people who are interviewing you, as opposed to just saying that AZB tier 1, therefore I want to be here.
Definitely. No vagueness and no scope for any sort of ambiguity.
Yeah.
And if there are any other questions?
Yes, I suppose one question which was posted.
Right.
This is by Brinda Nusrat. What are the internships of a student can get a foot in the door? Do marks and the national law schools help to get internships to secure a job in the corporate? Or can a student from other colleges also get into it? So does the national law schools give what some people perceive as an unfair advantage? It might. The fact is that, again, so I'll give you my example, and I was telling you that I wrote to Zia, and the next day I had an email back, because I had friends I had seniors, and I had friends who were at AZB, and therefore when she said, who's this guy, and you seem to know him, he's a year junior to you, they said, yeah, he's a nice guy. So that helped. But the fact is that being said, that is not the only criteria. We recruit from places that are not NLUs. Again, like I said, getting a foot in the door for the internship is important. When you intern with us, we then don't have NLU written on your shirt when you're walking around the office asking for work, or it doesn't say NLU when you come and give an associate the work. What they are then looking at is your work product. What they're then looking at is your attitude. What they're then looking at is your ability to function within a team. And teamwork in a law firm is very, very important. And therefore, once you're in and you have the ability to prove yourself, that is what you should take advantage of. I've already covered the fact that your CV has to, again, and I'm being blunt about it because of the sheer number of CVs we get. There is no hard and fast rule as to what we look at in the CV, but if your CV is interesting and we look at it and think that, this person might be interesting to have as an intern, you get your foot in the door, and then the rest is up to you. If you are able to impress the associates you're going to be working with, because realistically you are primarily working with the associates, you will get good feedback. And if you get good feedback, we take our associate feedback very, very strongly, because if you do join us, you're going to again be working with the same associates who gave you feedback. And if they like you, then you have a better chance of coming back and working with them again. Simran, I don't think that we have any other questions, but except a general question for all these students, though I am not on that part of the side. I'm also on the litigation side. So it was only for the students we did this webinar. Like you said that you always receive 4. The students who are participating here, they want how to make that 5th one, or how to contact and where to mail it. Just share that mail so that the 5th mail can also be dropped tomorrow. It's internships.bangalore@azbpartners.com. Because we have a dedicated email ID. If somebody is now the fact is that students have their own groups on which these IDs circulate. If somebody Googles AZB Bangalore internship, you will get that email ID. You can just send it there, and that's where we pick it up from. Like I said, we take our internship program very seriously, because we believe that that is what will help us identify the right people at the right time. Yeah. So I can say that the entire whatever was going across the students and the young professionals, you have actually dispelled those clouds. And I'm just reminded, like you said, it's all teamwork. And the next question normally arises in the mind of person, and we have always been talking on these webinars, is that what is important is to whether you have to take a stand in the life or whether it is a career in life. On a lighter vein, I'm reminded, I've often said that there was a Jawan recruited in an army. He was given a cycle on the very first day, and he finds that there is a cycle, but it does not have a stand, but it has a career. He immediately meets someone and says to his CEO, "Sir, we have the cycle is there, but there is a career ahead, but there's no stand." So next day he finds that the cycle has the stand, but there is no career. So immediately he says, "Sir, this time it's the other way around, that there is a stand, but there's no career." So the boss tells him that in life, there is only one way to grow. Either you can have a stand, but you don't have a career. But if you have a career, you don't have a stand. So it's all juxtaposed. You have to consider what has to go ahead. Right? And you have rightly said that the teamwork is important. And that's why the team word itself is said to together, everyone achieves more. So on that note, that together we were with the CDC ULS, we have achieved more. I've seen that a lot of people are participating on the live Facebook. I will share this screenshot with you as well as the CDC team. And we are thankful to CDC ULS for joining us in this noble cause where not only the students of ULS were given the insights from AZB and especially Anand. Tomorrow in that pursuit of webinars, we will be having a session on Articles 141 and 142 of Constitution of India. That is by D.L.N. Rao, Senior Advocate from Karnataka High Court. Do stay connected with us at 4 p.m. And again, once again, especially thanks to the Dean, the Director, and Ma'am Jasneet Walia, along with the entire team. Everyone stay safe, stay blessed, and during these testing times, enjoy life. And for the last, we will ask Simran to represent on behalf of CDC. Yeah, Simran.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. On behalf of Career Development Cell UILS, the whole department is indebted to you, and this session will definitely go down as a historic one for so articulately and patiently encapsulating every key component. Like we say, the laws are broadly classified into procedural and substantive, but I guess you had such a holistic approach and a broad overview of what the career pathways that lead to the corporate sector and what one must have within themselves, the tools which one can put to use effectively, that can lead to making great careers and the right approaches and the wise approaches that one can take from a student's perspective as well as from a practitioner's perspective. And on behalf of my faculty coordinators, Dr. Jasneet Walia, Director Ma'am, Rajinder Ma'am, thank you so much for having this collaboration and speaking to us in a engaging and a really comprehensively patient manner. Thank you again. And thank you so much, the entire team of Beyond Law CLC.
Thank you so much. I hope people found it useful.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.